daffodils. It is also called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. And this is written by none other than William Wordsworth. I'll tell you the summary of the poem first, and then we will go ahead and understand the meaning of each line stanza by stanza. Let's begin with the summary first. The speaker says that wandering like a cloud floating above hills and valleys, he encountered a field of daffodils beside a lake. The dancing, fluttering flowers stretched endlessly along the shore, and though the waves of the lake danced beside the flowers, the daffodils outdid the water in glee. The speaker says that a poet could not help but be happy in such a joyful company of flowers. He says that he stared and stared but did not realize what wealth the scene would bring him. For now, whenever he feels vacant or pensive, the memory flashes up that inward eye, or that is the bliss of solitude, and his heart fills with pleasure and dances with daffodils. Now, every poem has a form. So what is the form of this poem? As you can see, the poem consists of stanzas made of 6 lines. So how is the rhyming scheme? The rhyming scheme is ABAB CC, which means cloud, crowd, hills, daffodils, trees, breeze, A B A B C C. So let's jump right into the meaning of the poem and understand this poem line by line. Let's begin with the first 2 lines. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills. The meaning of difficult words I've already mentioned in the poem, so you can see it on your screen. You might want to note it down for future reference. So first 2 lines, let's understand the meaning. The speaker describes how he walked around and felt as lonely as a cloud. He does not say walked around, but uses much more descriptive word, wandered. Wandered means roaming around without a purpose, like when you explore something. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in its metaphorical use, wander can mean feeling purposeless and directionless in general. As in, you have questions like, what's the meaning of my life? The first concept that we want to take a look at is that the cloud is lonely. Asking questions about what this means will help us get into the poem. Are clouds lonely? Well, maybe the ones that float about valleys. In here, valleys is described as vale. And hills are lonely. It's more likely the speaker is projecting his own loneliness on the clouds. But that still doesn't explain the strange image, because clouds usually travel in groups, except in cartoons where you can have single rain cloud following Willie E. Coyote around just to ruin his day. Maybe a cloud is lonely because it is so far above the rest of the world. Its thoughts are just so lofty, and maybe the speaker's thoughts are too. Also, the cloud could be lonely because it floats over a natural landscape with no people in it. Maybe the speaker has thought of hills and valleys because he happens to be wandering through such landscape. These are some of the questions we're hoping the poem will help us sort out after this mysterious beginning. Moving on to the next set of lines. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. What's the meaning of these lines? Suddenly means all at once the speaker sees a group of daffodil flowers. We tend to think of daffodils as yellow, but he uses the more majestic sound. Maybe a cloud is lonely because it is so far above the rest of the world. Its thoughts are just so lofty, and maybe the speaker's thoughts are too. Also, the cloud could be lonely because it floats over a natural landscape with no people in it. Maybe the speaker has thought of hills and valleys because he happens to be wandering through such landscape. These are some of the questions we're hoping the poem will help us sort out after this mysterious beginning. Moving on to the next set of lines. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. What's the meaning of these lines? Suddenly means all at once the speaker sees a group of daffodil flowers. We tend to think of daffodils as yellow, but he uses the more majestic sounding golden. He calls them a crowd, so they must be packed tightly together. Then he elaborates on crowd by adding the noun host. A host is just a big group. Yes, host and crowd mean pretty much the same thing. But that's where the connotations come in. Those vague associations that attach to certain words. A crowd is associated with groups of people, while host is associated with angels, because people often refer to host of angels. Coupled with description of their angelic golden color, we seem to be dealing with some very special daffodils. Moving on to the next lines. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. He sees the daffodils beside the lake and underneath some trees. It's a breezy day and the flowers flutter and dance on their stems. Maybe now is a good time to step outside the poem for just a second to note that Wordsworth lived in a part of England known as the Lake District, which is filled with lots of hills, valleys, and of course lakes. We can assume he's walking in fairly remote and wild part of the countryside. Now, back to the poem. Fluttering suggests flight, which could bring us back to the angels or even birds or butterflies. Dancing is something that usually only humans do. The daffodils are given the qualities of humans and also of some kind of otherworldly creatures perhaps. Moving on to the second stanza and the next set of lines. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. What does these lines mean? The emphasis, or the poet emphasizes the point that there are a whole lot of daffodils, more daffodils than he has probably ever seen before. After all, these are flowers that usually grow in scattered groups in the wild or in people's well-tended gardens. The flowers stretch continuously without a break, like the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, each one gleaming like a star. The comparison to stars provide new evidence that the speaker is trying to make us think of angels or other heavenly beings. Moving on to the next set of lines. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. Like the Milky Way galaxy, the flowers are roughly concentrated in a line that seems to stretch as far as the eyes can see, which means never-ending. They, flowers, line the shore or margin of a bay of the lake, which must be a relatively large lake. If you ever seen the Milky Way or the photo in the textbook, you know that galaxy appears